I'm Bob Lee, the president of China Society of Southern California. Welcome to our Zoom meeting, which is being co-sponsored by the Chinese Historical Society of Southern California. Before we begin, please know that this program is being recorded. If you want to see the program again, or to let your friends see the program, in a day or two, we will be sending you a Zoom link. And also we will be listing on our webpage the YouTube link so you can see the program. If you have any questions during the program, please enter them in the chat box and Pierre will try to answer some of them at the end of his talk. Pierre Odier has been a friend of China Society for over 30 years. He was born in Switzerland, immigrated to the United States at the age of 19. He taught photography, fine arts, the humanities, and making yearbooks at Hoover High School in Glendale. Pierre is an adventurer who travels to remote places to document indigenous peoples. He authored, illustrated, and published books to record his findings. He lectures to numerous groups, including China Society and the Adventurers Club of Los Angeles. Pierre also has a wonderful ethnographic collection. During this talk, please be on the lookout for interesting items that Pierre manages to add to his collection. Earlier this year, I approached Pierre and asked him if there were any lectures that would be appropriate for the China Society. He said that he was working on a book on Burma, Myanmar, and that it would be published in a couple of months. Being a quote, quote, China Society, I asked him if there were any ties to China. He said that the book was focused on the Golden Triangle area of Burma, which is a remote area in eastern Burma that borders China and Thailand. The indigenous people of this area had both trade, social, and historic ties to the Chinese on the other side of the border. So there was no objections. And here we are in May with A Pebble in the Sand, an Adventurous Collection, Volume 5, Burma, Myanmar. This book is hot off the press, and we are privileged to be the first group to have a book talk by the author. So without further ado, I'm turning the program over to Pierre.
Well, thank you, Bob. Listen, you said a lot of things and I appreciate it very much. It's true. My connection with your society is long and I hope I can do it justice, even though I'm entering this new field of Zooming, and I hope that everything goes, because I tell you, if it wasn't for you guys, I wouldn't be sitting here. And I want to specifically thank Felicia for making it happen, because I don't know what buttons to push. And Bob, you know, we're on the same page on that. But anyway, so thank you very much for these kind introductions. Well, ladies and gentlemen, if you had seen my programs before, you know that they're not really the standard programs where I tell you what airplane you can take and what cities you can be in. So bear with me. The one thing that I cannot do on this short program is be specific with the names of all the villages and all the people, because there's over 50 villages that I visited. And therefore, you'll just have to bear with me that I tell you this. But however, to start, I want to give you a map of the area I went to. So it's the yellow area. It's called the Shan State. Today, the Shan State is again in the headlines in the news because the locals are fighting the government itself. So yes, you will see some headlines. Now you will see that on the right-hand side where you see the Kengtong, and the north is China and the south is Laos people, and then Thailand. So it's very close to all of these interactions, and they're all connected very closely with roads and secret passages in the jungle. So there's a lot of, I can tell you a lot about that. However, entering Burma in the first place, and I still want to call it Burma because that's when the experience happened. Um, I was told that I couldn't enter, so I had to come in via the back road, if you want to call it. And today I feel pretty safe saying that because I'm too far away from the shots. But I did have to go to the main cities at first and visit what they had to offer to make the connections to go inland. This is a pagoda that was turned into a restaurant and a very cheap looking appearance. But anyway, they're trying to make the best of it to attract tourism, which they opened up a couple of years ago and then closed again. The first thing that I notice is always the outside connections. On the left, you see a beautiful boy in a temple, but look at the T-shirt. And so obviously you can see that there is a global connections. I thought it was the Lakers, but I was clearly corrected as the Indiana Pacers, so it's not the Lakers, but I thought it was the Lakers. The people there are really relying a lot on the monks to communicate and bring in news in. You can see the guy reading the newspaper because a lot of the local people in the villages are illiterate. There's always one or two person there, and they are usually the monks who have some kind of training and some kind of outside connection. Even though some of their ways of calling them to prayer or to is still primitive by the ringing of a wooden gong that has been there since the 13th century. Their living quarters are very primitive, but they're very functional. If you look on the left, you will see their kitchen, and there's about 22 monks that live out of that kitchen. And when you sit there and you figure out how they make this, you see that what they use is what they've been using for hundreds of years, the stones and the fireplace and all that. So that was interesting to me. The washing, the cleaning and all of that comes with the help of the government, who brings in a pipe, as you can see in the background. And that means everybody congregates on that pipe to get some water, even the local people. The year there, that's in 2008, you can see the headlines. And I never really pick up the headlines because then I would be discouraged. But all my friends said, don't go now because there's a lot of problems there. The difference between the problems today and then is that then at that time, it was the monks who were standing against the government. Today, if you read the headlines, you will see that it's everybody else except the monks. The monks are in a supportive role. So these were the headlines from that particular time. And it's sad to say it still exists, but it's now more in the mountain regions where the real fighting is taking place. One of the other things that have survived all these centuries, all the different types of foods. Now, here we just go to the store and buy a can, or we get something that's imported. But I guarantee you, I've seen about 20 or 30 different food items that I had no idea what they were or where they were coming from. Even though they explained it to me, I never ventured into eating them or testing them. The other thing about the market is that the market is controlled by the local people. The group of people you're looking at there are people who walked about 2 days to come to the market to sell their goods, in this case, peanuts and a few other items. However, they're not allowed to go inside the market. So they stand on the outside. It's another anti-minority movement from the people who own the big markets. And that's kind of tragic, but they were out there and they were still very friendly and happy and smiling, even though they made the long trek and they're hoping to sell some of their goods. This one is, to me, interesting, this image, because these are live pigs. This is how they package the pigs to bring from the village or to the village. And this to me was interesting because it's very ingenious that they are then put on the back of a man or a bicycle. And this is how they take the pigs back to the village. Now, in those villages all over Burma, I discovered things that you would not see anywhere else. For instance, these are all packaged leaves for tobacco. So they have a huge tobacco industry there. However, on the land, the land is divided by different tribes. So each tribe is competing to get into the tobacco market with others. And the others could be outsiders or other minorities. But the market is always very crowded, and you have to kind of decide where you go and where you buy the tobacco. The tobacco that they make, or the cigarettes they make, are the ones you see in those rapids, and they are just ready to kill you. It's like almost smoking grass or something that's just not but it's very cheap. If you can get 5 cigarettes for a penny. So yes, that's for them. It's a luxury, and it also becomes a trade item, and it provides a marketing technique. On the top, you will see the river and the boats on the lakes that come to the shores from where the wagon people on the right, on the bottom, bring in the goods that they grow on the land. But the people in the boats, they come in and they bring like fish and things that they harvest from the actual water. So there's a symbiotic trade going on between those two areas of interest. In some of the markets close to the minorities, somebody has figured out how to cater to the outsiders, meaning other minorities, not foreigners, and bring in their costume, their local wear, their traditional dress. That's only one store in the main market. Obviously, that to me caught my full attention. Is fascinating. The women who dress in the market, that's the way they dress in the village. I try to identify them by the way they're dressed. And they look at me funny because I'm looking at them. And I'm looking at them trying to decipher where they are and where they're coming from. Now, on the right is a Wa woman, and the left is a Pongo woman. So in this particular case, in this particular market, there was a hierarchy. The Wa people, which was my main objective, which I'll talk about a little later, they are slaves in the market, meaning they work for those two ladies in the back and they run the errands, they collect the monies from others, they move around, and they get very, very little pay. Well, that to me was interesting because I then made a connection with the lady in the black hat in the middle to go and to visit her village. The other women say, "Oh, they are dirty. Don't go there. It's this." But you do it anyway because that's what I wanted. I wanted to see the Wa people. Now, going to these villages is not easy. My guide, Paul, the one in the white hat there, became my good friend and good guide. He would approach the people in the village. Here he's approaching the Wa woman that I saw in the village and makes arrangements to go to their village. So on the way to the village, you'll see the villagers will come down, let's say, with the bamboo in their carts. And here we are. So my guide knows where he's going, I hope. Sometimes not always, but he knows the area. And we're heading for those hills. Now, I say this a little bit with a smirk in my face because today I can't even walk up my stairs anymore without holding the railing. And here I'm going into these very remote mountains. But I think the moment I got inside these mountains, no matter how many days it took to go all over the place, my adrenaline or my spirit kept me going, and I did all of these villages in 15 days. And I marked them on this primitive map that my guide designed so I would know where I was going. But today I have no clue what the distance were and so on. But the distance between the center from where we left and to the Chinese border on the top right-hand corner is 60 miles. So you can see it's pretty close. Now, this is not 60 miles on a road, a paved road. These are like treks through the jungle, and a lot of times they change the route so they wouldn't be discovered. So you can see it's a very close proximity and creating a major trade agreement with the Chinese. Now, when he says, well, let's go to this village. Well, okay, but you have to understand, this is way over there. You go down the hill, up the hill, and then you come up to a village that's positioned in kind of a defensive position. It's there to defend themselves, historically always defend themselves. The area is absolutely beautiful, flush, lush, but on the other hand, walking is another story. So this is one of the trails that we followed up to a particular village. My guide's walking ahead, and it's very calm. The birds are singing, and it's fresh, and it smells good. But then all of a sudden, there are people coming. And that's when I started to bring out my camera and documenting what I saw, not quite knowing exactly what I was looking at first. But my guide had a way of how shall I say, making these people comfortable when they first see this foreigner. And the next thing you know, we're in a discussion. They're going down to the market, but I'm starting to document them in my own way. The old man made 2 chairs that he's taking to the market, hoping to sell. Well, it took him maybe 2-3 weeks to make these chairs. And on an economic point of view, it's kind of like giving it away because there's really not much they can get for it. But anyway, it keeps him busy and he's happy. But he's going down to the market with his friends, his daughters or his wives. In this case, you can see they are all decked out. And this is something that I always like to observe is what do these people who have absolutely nothing, what do they do to adorn themselves? Well, they adorn themselves, first of all, with a lot of pride. So the littlest things like a pierced ear, with all these little beads that they collected that came through some kind of trade route with a silver plug. The armbands are all pure silver. And they're looking at me, what am I looking for, these armbands? And they obviously, in some areas, have heard that some foreigners or the market, actually local Burmese people would buy them so they could sell them on the market. But I made sure they knew I was not interested in buying anything. The top image, you'll see that's the village of the Wa people that we were going to. Now, we're about, maybe 20 minutes away from the village, but someone had already spotted us. So what happened is the villagers, and I found out later, the chief, he would send kids down to greet us and check us out, ask where you're going, what you wanted. Well, my guide made sure they knew that we wanted to go see the village. So they took us up to the village and took us right to the leader. Now, this man sits there, and today he's the head of 250,000 armed Wa people in the mountains. And if you read the current conflict, you will see that that's where some pressure comes from. But he's there cutting mats for the floor. He's very stoic and welcomed me with open arms. Why? I will never know, because he could have been very suspicious that I was spying or it was somebody else. We sat on his deck. It didn't take long for all people from all over villages and everybody to come and check things out. The only thing that I had were cigarettes and crackers. And that quickly made a different kind of a connection because they like to smoke these cigarettes. And I collect pipes, so that became a trade item for me. If you can notice the lady on the right, all the black teeth and the black where they chew, all of a sudden you realize I've seen that before somewhere else. Some of the customs transcend all borders and all cultures. The thing that was amazing to me is that all the children showed up, and they were from all various families, but they all taken care of. And when I gave a cookie to one, they all came and wanted, and there was no big problem. The little boy wanted to steal the cigarettes from the lady in the front. That was interesting because he wanted to give it to his mother, but who was not from this tribe. And so it caused a little, not a problem, but they argued, no, you can't have him, you're too young and all of that. Now, the lady that I met on the street with his earrings, I recognized her in the crowd sitting on the deck. And if you can see in the bottom right-hand corner, I immediately gave her kids some cookies. And all of a sudden she says, oh, you want one of my kids? I said, what do you mean? Well, why don't you take him to the village and help him out and do that? And obviously you can see that there's a connection there that they want you to help out with whatever you could give. And my guide said, no, that we weren't going back to the city. We were going to other villages. That kind of kept us going in a good way. The chief, however, decided that it was time that I meet the spiritual leader of the village who lives in his hut on the bottom. He took these two girls to take me there. And in exchange, I gave him cigarettes. I feel guilty because I'm a non-smoker and I think cigarettes, that's the few pleasures that they have rather than smoking these terrible things that they make themselves. They take great joy in a foreign cigarette. These two girls took me to the house of this shaman. We call him a shaman. He was the village spiritual leader. And so I climb in and I'm sitting on his deck, looking out at the mountain and the environment. And all of a sudden, I hear music. He's sitting there. He's serving me tea and playing music. Well, to me, that was such a sweet gesture to serenade me with a cup of tea and some music. And I just settled, I kind of melted away and faded into whatever was available to me. Like I didn't stand up, I didn't do anything. And all of a sudden, he says, you know, we do this, we don't do headhunting anymore. He brought it all up. I said, well, I didn't ask about it because I didn't want to. But I thought to myself, okay, maybe now's a chance to dig in a little bit. And he allowed me to go inside his house. In this house, there are all the things that they used in the past and today for their ritual, for tribal tradition, and again, also for the old traditional headhunting. The cups on the top, if you count them, that's how many clan leaders come to the village when they have a big discussion of some sort. And that to me was interesting because each individual had his own cup. What caught my attention, however, was this board way up. Now, this is one of the few pictures that I took with a flash because I wanted to see it. You can see this is blood covered. Now, in the early days, this is where they would put up the head hunting heads that they showed off to the villagers before they gave the ceremonies to put him in its proper place to defend the villages against the spirit. But it's also now being used for animals. Well, then the animals that they put on there, they have been killed with the darts that you see on the top, and they also have a significant connection to their spiritual world. So yeah, there's a transition from the headhunters to the animals, and all of a sudden now you can see they're still keeping some of this tradition going, but they're moving away from what they did like 20 or 30 years ago. However, on the back pole of that particular room, again, I did that with flash. You can see some skulls and animal skulls is still there drying in the wind. So I didn't particularly ask a lot. I just took that picture and it suffices. However, on the right, you'll see the arrows that they use to do the hunting, also the animals, and they are poisoned. So the liquid inside this bamboo is poisoned, then they put the arrows in and they go hunting. So those are things that are traditionally interesting to me. However, it's very hard to obtain true information. First of all, I don't know their language. And second of all, I don't want to intrude on what they were doing forever. And I don't want them to think I'm spying and I'm going to go publicize and make money off of their tradition. However, I am still very interested and do document every inch that I can. This is the chief's sacred drum. He will call his warriors with this drum, and inside the drum are some ancient skull from the village leaders that were killed, and they're keeping them there as like a shrine. And on the top right-hand corner, you will see the drumsticks that only the elder of the village with privileges through after a ceremony are allowed to use to call the spirits back from the elders. The other thing that was interesting to me is like they're so far up on the hill, where did they get the water from? Well, they had a very elaborate water channel system. And when I first came there, you can see my guide is in the background. There were the girls and the ladies, they were totally naked, taking their showers and cleaning up. Obviously, I didn't take pictures of that. I waited till someone came just to clean their hair so I could show the trough and what they do. And at that moment, what I noticed is they couldn't care less if I was there. It was perfect. I just fitted in. They didn't challenge me. They went on with their life. That's always a good thing for me because I don't want to be the intruder that then goes away, making them uncomfortable. Now, look at the terrain on the bottom. So the guys, oh, you are interested in that? Well, we'll go to this other village and we'll see this and that. I'm saying, okay. So we started trekking down to this other village and got caught in a storm, a rainstorm. Now, these villagers have land away from their village, and that's where they grow their crops and where they cultivate. So the women with some of the kids go to these areas and cultivate this, where the men stay in the village themselves, and God knows what they do, but they say they're to defend the village. Well, the women are the ones who do all the labor, let's put it that way. And so on the way down, my guide said, well, it's raining, should we go on? These women came over and says, come into my hut, come into my hut. Oh my God, that was such a lifesaver. You can see I'm totally drenched. I'm just wetter than everything. And in my pockets, in the jackets, I have all the things, and they're in plastic bags. And they didn't want me to go on. So they said, well, why don't you stay here? So they brought out the blanket, and that's where we spent the night, in this makeshift hut in the middle of the village. I felt very honored by that because the kids were there and they were sitting on the sleeping bag with me, well, the blankets that they put out, and they thought this was the greatest thing. Now, what I'm concerned with is what are they going to say when they go back to the village? The kids are going to talk, this foreigner came in here, but it's still all done with great respect. Then they start giving you food. I ate a lot of cucumbers, I can tell you that. And all of a sudden you realize that it makes no difference where you're coming from. But again, look at this map. I showed you one village, and look at all these villages I went to. So the bottom right is the Wa tribe. That's where we're going. trekking through the forest, the rainforest, or the mountains, you run across all sorts of things. I'm particularly proud of this picture because this is my guide. He was one of the smartest person I met with locally. When we went to the big market before to find these tribal connections, he bought all sorts of stuff, and I didn't know what he was buying. But what he was buying placebo pills, he was buying all sorts of medication and this water where you can clean out wounds. And I thought, oh, what the heck is going on here? But when he goes to these villages, he takes care of what's needed. And on the way to this village, this woman had lost a toe. And so right there together, we sat down and he says, you know how to operate? I said, what do you mean? Well, we got to fix this toe. So we did. And don't ask me medical terms and so on. We just did. We cleaned it and wrapped it in Band-Aids. And then I gave him my bandana. And then that became like the foot, like a shoe to her foot. She was barely limping. So she said, you need to go to my village. Well, this is not where we wanted to go, but we had to go to her village and see her medicine man that normally would treat her when she comes back to the village. Well, this was intriguing to me because that village doctor, as you call him, he had his own way of curing things, but for his, it was mainly by suction. So if you had a problem, and he's showing it on the right, he would suck out your problem. Now, how effective that was is yet to be known. But on the other hand, the people believed in him, and that gave him some kind of how shall I say, a comfort for the fact that someone's listening to their ailment. Now, in those areas, there are all these different tribes. Well, how do you recognize them when they all look the same? The way you do it is with their headgears. These women wear these headgears 24/7. And the one on the right, I don't know if it's overlapping enough, but if you can see the baby and being carried on the back, that to me was just so precious. Baby is sleeping and she's just sitting there contemplating. But look at all the silver and all of that, what created this image of that particular tribe. I did a lot of documenting of these headgears, which you see later. One of the things that I was pleased to note is that now some of these mountain villagers are starting to grow corn and other non-drug items. Before that, they were making all their money with the opiates and the poppy fields. So now they have changed, a lot of them, not all of them, have changed into cultivating corn and wheat and all sorts of other edible commodities, which they then trade. That was kind of a good idea. The other thing that impressed me is how they're set up in terms of their village, their homes, how they take care of their, as a defense system, number one. Number two, the children play, but down in the bottom are the little alcoves where they put the animals at night, where they store several things, the food and so on, but they defend the home from above, and they could see over the mountains if people are approaching, which I thought was kind of clever. Now, I thought to myself, what did they have? The only thing they have there is natural, the trees, the bamboo, and that's it. And no, once in a while you'll see the ropes they make themselves. I have found very little nails or screws or anything else that we would use to adorn our homes. In this village on the right-hand side, you see the son of my guide. This is kind of at the end, I was kind of getting tired. So he figured his son, who followed him and brought him some supplies, more supplies, decided to stay with us, which was kind of nice. So we're saying goodbye to this family that hosted me for a couple of days. And I say to the man on the left, I say, well, can I say goodbye to your wife, please? Because she was so nice. She cooked some, oh, no, she's gone now. She's in the village because she has to go paint the umbrellas, which they sell on the market. And I thought that was kind of a neat little thing that they are now connecting to commerce outside their own region, and others are marketing it for them. But on the other hand, the reality of their survival is still real. They still fight each other. They're now fighting the government for sure. And one of the reasons they're fighting is because they don't want to be interfered with their trade routes. For the longest time, it was the drugs going to China and Thailand. And you can see they're well equipped. So this is kind of not a secret picture, but I was in that home and I saw these weapons. I thought, well, that's kind of interesting. They're ready to go at any moment. Now, when I looked at these particular weapons. My camera was going left and right, and I'm looking over where the fire is, and I see these little kids. There's nothing that you can say that it's not charming. You look at these kids, they're absolutely gorgeous, they're harmonious, and you just hug them all, and they get to be curious. They're the ones who approach you before the old people come and ask questions. So this to me was a very precious moment, because what happened there, after I got very comfortable and everybody's talking and looking and all of that, I came up, because you don't ask too many questions. I came up with a question. I says, well, how many people are in your village? Well, this is a very dangerous question, because that's what the enemy and the government wants to know. So there was a little hesitation, and all of a sudden the chief, the one bending over, asked his two fellow to go get corn. I thought, oh, why we're getting corn? So they went and got corn. Now, how they put this together, they pick one corn and say, this is Joe, and they put it down. Joe has a wife, okay? Then they put another corn down. Joe has a kid, 3 corns. Joe had a grandfather. Oh no, grandfather died, so they didn't put that down. And he does that until the whole village is laid out on the floor, and then he comes and counts and he says, yeah, we have 250 people in the village. I thought that was ingenious. And at that time, you kind of wonder, and I guess it's also a protection that nobody knows unless they tell you how many are in the village, and that's for defense purpose and all sorts of other reasons. The bag on the bottom left-hand corner is tea that he gave me a bag of tea, and I'll tell you what, I would defend that tea. When I came through the customs in LA, I had to do a whole song and dance routine for this tea, but I still have some in the house because they wouldn't let me bring it in normally. And I convinced them it's not marijuana, it's not something, it's just plain tea. So I did bring it in, and the guy finally let me take it. So, sometimes you don't know what you're getting into. Now, the crops that they pick is seasonal. So they were also telling me that on the off seasons, they didn't know what to do. So they started an industry of dyeing fabrics. And that's one thing that they passed on to other community. But this lady is dyeing the fabric, and she is an expert with indigo dye. And I saw it on her hand, and I asked, and she didn't want her picture taken, nothing. So I didn't take pictures of her doing the dyeing, but you can see in the background, maybe vaguely, the dye pits and so on of the indigo dye. So it was very interesting, but she was from a different tribe too, identified by the plaque on her chest. Now, my guide in the other area, when you have guides for a couple of days and you sleep with them and you're out there, eat and all that, they become very close. This particular guide, a woman guide, a powwow woman, said, I'm going to show you how we pay off the military. Oh, that's interesting. She took me up in the mountains where they were making bootleg. And this is a huge operation. And I tell you, they offered me some, and I just smelled it and I was drunk. So I didn't even take a taste, but it's powerful stuff. And that's how they pay off the guards so that they can do all the other business, mainly trading the illegal opiums and all of that. However, at the same time, when you have that kind of an industry, you need to have another industry. This is the pottery industry. So she took me to this other village. Now, when I say village, you see, this is a half a day of walking, and then another half a day of walking to get to where we're going. She took me to this village, which was making pottery. Now, I used to teach ceramics too, and so it was fascinating on that sense, but it also let me know how they were doing it, how they were doing their fabric dyeing, how they were continuing an industry that nobody really paid attention to before it was a necessity, before they cut out the drug dealing. Now, I'm showing you this picture because when you meet someone, they see you, and this woman approached me and so on, and I desperately, for half an hour, tried to get her pipe. I was trying to exchange my pipe. I love these pipes. And she was toying with me forever. Oh, you can't have the pipe. How many chickens do you have? I don't have any chickens. Well, you can have my pipe, but then you can buy my fabric. No, I can't buy your fabric. I want your pipe. It went back and forth and back and forth. She won. She kept the pipe, and I did not buy her fabric. However, she says, well, go to my village and visit my people. I says, only if you give me the pipe. She didn't give me the pipe. But when I went to the village, the word had already been out that I was looking for pipes. Little things like that. You could see the man sitting there with pipes on the bottom, really old traditional pipes. And he was ready for me. And how did you know that? Well, the word got out that I had pipes. So we started interacting, and he started singing and playing and telling me history. But if you look at the bottom right-hand corner on the mat, you'll see my 2 pipes laying there. And I'm just waiting to trade, which we did finally. We traded the pipes. One of the problems was that the women wanted to get into it. So they wanted to sell me their costumes, their belts, everything. No, I just wanted this pipe. All of a sudden, he stands up and he says, okay, I will show you who I am. He shows me all of his tattoos because he was sitting down at first. And okay, he was totally naked. And I said, I'd like to take a picture. Would you please put your shirt on and so on? And he did. And he was a little bit, not miffed, but he's, why do I have to put my shirt? I said, listen, I'm going to show these pictures to a lot of people. And I just want to show the tattoos. Well, that meant he sat down for half an hour and explained every single tattoo to me. You can see the clock up in the window. It was 4:45 and 4:45. And at 6, it got dark. So we had to work for another 2 hours to go down the hill. But anyway, that's another story. But he then introduced me to his wife, who's a weaver. And you, all of a sudden you say, why am I here? And you have to take in every single moment. But you know, you miss half of it. You can't absorb it all. Now, I was in another area, and this little boy approached me and he says, you want to see the balloon? Oh, okay. Now they're from Thailand. And I said, okay. He says, give me $1. So I gave him $1 and I said, okay, whatever. Guess what? He was true to his word. For about a half an hour, we walked into the jungle, and there was this group, 5 of them, doing their thing. They were kicked out of Thailand because the mother no longer wanted to be her kids to be ogled or looked at by tourists and get paid for and compete with others. So they went into the middle of this region, which they had permission with the local tribes, and were making fabrics and sending it down to the villages, to the city. Now, all of a sudden you realize that you're out of your element. What do I have to offer other than the fact that I'm an outsider? So this lady, she wanted money. And I said, well, I don't have any money. She says, well, then give me your shirt. Well, I need my shirt. Well, give me. So all of a sudden you start trading things. You know, you come out of there, my belt. I traded my belt with this lady. And she then wanted to give me beads. And I just made a point. I says, no, I'm giving you my belt as a gift. I don't want anything from you in return for the belt. Oh, she was so happy. And she was just telling everybody that she's still holding my belt there. The whole village came in. The lady on the right, she's blind, but she was telling all the villagers who I was, what I looked like, and and she deducted that all by my voice, and she touched me on the shoulder once and so on. That was very touching, a touching moment. And that's where my guide was distributing all sorts of placebo medicine and some real medicine for the ones who were really sick. And again, you look at the lady on the left with the pipe. Yes, I'm interested in pipes. Now, having visited that region after a long period of time for 15 days, it was time for me to move on to another area that had great interest in historical sense, because it's people who live in the middle of a lake, Inle Lake. And to me, that was another experience that kind of made me realize there's more ways to live. They live on this lake. They trade on this lake. They go with the boats in and out of the markets. And the lake is on stilts, the village is on stilts, but the gardens are floating gardens. So these are clumps of dirt that they tie to the bottom of the lake, and they grow their crops, tomatoes and everything on top of it. It's ingenious. And now I said to my guide, where are we going? He says, oh, we'll find a place. So we found this place. That hut on the far left became my room for a couple of days. And when we went to the village, I noticed some of these on the shore, some of these people from these other villages that I had visited were coming down to this area. So it proved to me there's an incredible trade route going on that's kind of between them and not the outsider. This is my powwow guide. I call her Karen for better knowledge. I didn't know her name. She says, I'm Karen. Okay, you're Karen. So she says, well, I want to introduce you to someone. So she took the boat that you see on the bottom, the 3 of us, my guide, her and me, and we're going up this river, and we come to a place which was sensational. This is 13th century leftovers, totally decomposing, falling apart, whatever. It was a village at one time. It was a worship place. It was a graveyard. Let me tell you, this is where I thrived. And she was my guide there and didn't hesitate to take me to every single corner. I was there for about 4 hours where she thought I'd just be there for a half an hour. I went into every single one of those, took pictures. Oh, finally, I got the attention of children who came to visit. So I took a few pictures of those so that they understood that I was okay. And some of the things you see are you don't quite understand, because the big Buddha is really restored, but he's holding a little Buddha without a head in his hand. I mean, there's significance to all of that. I just documented, and later on I did research and found out exactly what it was. This is an inside cave of one of these stupas. Now, all these little dots that you see there are all insects and animals flying all over the place. But I still took the picture because I thought this was absolutely gorgeous. What you see on his hand is like an offering that I gave. It's leaves wrapped into bamboo, very simple, with a little red string on it, and I just put it there. Now, you know, this means nothing to me in terms of value, but when they knew that I did that, the word got out, the whole place was open, and I could go anywhere I wanted, and it was just, and I took pictures of just not interrupting anywhere, not interruption, no questions. But look at all this stuff, these treasures that are just left, they're falling apart, nobody's maintaining it. So this was kind of a highlight too of my trip, which I had not expected. And that was my powwow guide who made this happen. This used to be on top of one, and this was a water spout. And I thought this was kind of interesting. Now, one of the things that I noticed also that there's, for instance, this is the rear end of an elephant sticking out in this brick thing. And now I ask, where can, oh, I had to listen to an hour of traditional stories about the value of the elephant and how they came in from Thailand and how they migrated and all that. So yes, I heard it, but you know what? I could not record all of this information at once. It was just too much. This one day was overwhelmed with it. So I just kind of looked at the beauty and the structure and things, and then making discovery. Now, this is also a dangerous area because there's a lot of snakes, a lot of insects. It's not, nobody really goes there. So they made very sure my guide was always in front of me, making a lot of noise. And I did see some snakes, and I did see some what I call lizards or whatever, but anyway, they bats. But when I went inside one of these caves, I wanted to go, you can see the bats on the top left-hand corner. He says, don't go in, there's bats. So no, I have to do this. I have to look at this. These are powwow people from about 13th to 14th century going to the market. It's just very, very barely visible. You can see the outline. But at one time that was all painted with gold paint and very elaborate. So that's all that's left over. But I tell you, to me, that's a beautiful treasure to keep. And the significant part is that the two powwow ladies with the bags, those are powwow bags that they had. The man that she introduced me to, who didn't speak any language, he mumbled, but he had no legs, no arms, 1 foot. And he was painting these just incredible little boxes. Well, you know, these were for my daughter's Christmas presents. Now, this is out of context. It's probably in their home and sitting there. Nobody really understands that this is that man's livelihood and how he's doing it and how tedious. So I said, okay, I would like to buy some. He says, no, you can have them. I said, I can't take them. I have to give you some. So I talked to my guy. I said, for God's sakes, give him something in return. I gave him my pants. And, you know, okay, so it was an exchange, but this lasted forever. And my daughters have them. It's in their house. And I hope one day they'll ask me what it's about, because, you know, Christmas comes, you just give them gifts and everybody's doing stuff. And then things get a wayside. Nobody understands it a couple of years later. So they have it. And I will be glad to tell them the story one day. Now, coming out of the jungle, again, you look at nature, you look at the environment, and you look at natives. And I saw this. This to me just totally got me off guard because it's not traditional. It's not, doesn't fit into whatever I saw there. So I asked my guy, can we go closer? We went closer, and guess what it was? It was Japanese graves from the Second World War. Well, okay, now all of a sudden I had to switch gears. Japanese, World War II, World War, when did they come? When did they invade? So that opened up a whole other area of history that I personally wasn't really involved with. I knew the Japanese came by there and the Brits and all that, but that they left behind so many casualties and they're still looking at the shrines. To me, this was another twist in history that I had not prepared for, even though I thought I knew the area pretty well. The other thing that I wasn't prepared for is what was there at one time and what's left. This is a temple, an exquisite temple in the middle of nowhere. The village has 29 people in there, but they have 4 monks. And these monks, look at that. These are treasures, but it's, 29 people in that village and it's way up in the mountains and nobody knows about it. I mean, nobody cares about it, but the monks are there to take care of it. And I try to talk to this monk and he says, well, I'm just here to train young monks. Well, okay. And he's smoking and made his own cigarettes. So I offered him cigarettes again. And on the right-hand side, I have pictures of my family, my kids and everything on a laminated plate. And I give it to them and they can look at them. It's always a good move to show your family when you're in this area. But this head monk really took his job serious and was training all the monks, have him sign my flag and all of that. And on the left, you see one of the most gorgeous carved doors that I've ever seen. And it's one of the few things that they're preserving in that monastery, everything else falling apart. But that door means a lot to them. And I hope it stays there. But, one of these days it'll end up somewhere in somebody's home or in a museum. And there's 2 ways of thinking about it. If it doesn't go in a museum, it will deteriorate. But on the other hand, it belongs there. And if it deteriorates on their territory, then that's okay. On the right-hand side, the monk signing my flag, the other monk is giving me, he told him, go get some incense. Well, okay, they make the incense. So I brought it home. Oh, it was great. But anyway, little things like that carry you a far way, a long time. On the way out, I saw all of these things on all of these trees. And what it is, it's sacred spirit catchers. The only thing I can do to compare it to is like one of those eye catchers that the Native Americans have. But yes, the dream catchers for the Americans, but this is not dream. This is to prevent and informing the spirits if there's nothing in this village or there's someone dead or something like that. This, again, was a moment that I had to learn a lot quickly because I didn't know what it was. On the other hand, in some of the caves, they were very elaborate with their history. And this is interesting because I mentioned to you that I saw that elephant in that temple and I didn't know where it came from. Well, here you see an image of an elephant, which is painted in one of the caves. And this is gold paint on a background, on a roughed out stone background. So the elephant showed up. That's why I'm showing the picture because it ties in. One day I will take the time to figure it out. Well, as you know, gold plays a big role. And obviously the showpiece is a showpiece for Burma or Myanmar is the center of the Yangon temple. And it's full of gold. It's made with gold. And on the top of it, you have a 78 karat diamond. Well, I'm not impressed by that, but I'm impressed at how it stayed there during all the wars and nobody was able to steal it or take it away because there was a lot of conflict going on. This monk on the left invited me into, and he gave me these beads and he gave me a long song, not song and dance routine, but prayed and talked to me and I didn't understand a single word, but I was honored to be sitting there because everybody walking by who was there for other purpose saw me sitting there with this monk and they smiled and it was a good feeling. On the other hand, monks were so tired of being there. You can see the one on the left is sleeping. On the way out of this wonderful experience, which is kind of more commercial now because they're in there selling all their religious trinkets, is one of the oldest temple that survived. It's all made out of wood, which now is training some young monks. That to me was interesting. It's off limit. It's gone. Nobody knows, but my guide knew to take me there. So I obviously documented what I could, which is not really the things that people look at, but I do. All this graffiti, all that. You see an elephant up there, a horn, and you see a Mickey Mouse on a horse. I wanted to go closer to it, but there was a moat in the front I couldn't step over. So anyway, now I did see a Mickey Mouse, which is the one on the top. You see the children with my family there. And that's how I would like to end my program, by showing you that I shared my family with them, and I'm sharing it with you. And I hope that I give you something of these people who are very, very honorable and valuable, and need to be kept alive forever and ever. So I appreciate the opportunity to share this. I hope I didn't do injustice to these people, and I hope you enjoyed it. Thank you. That's my program. That's all I have to say. I hope there's someone alive somewhere else in this Zoom thing. Oh, there she is.
Oh, hi. Thank you.
You're
Uh,
welcome.
let's see. We have a few questions. So, oh, someone says in the chat, clap, clap, clap. I guess that's your applause. Um,
Oh, okay. Okay.
let's see. Oh, yeah. So to everybody, if you have a question for Pierre, just submit it in the chat, and then I'll read it to Pierre, and then he'll answer it. Well, the first question, you sort of, I mean, you talked about a guide, but this is from AC Dre. Do you travel with an interpreter?
No, I travel with a guide. Now, when I go into an area, I have many connections and I ask for somebody. And sometimes it comes from the most unusual source. I sit down with my guides for about 2 hours and we talk about everything, what I want, what I don't want. I don't want to buy anything. I don't want any women. I don't want any drugs. I don't want beer. Can you do it? But I'm interested in the local history. How much do you know about these local people? And if he can convince me that he knows and is knowledgeable, then I hire him. And then I say, well, how much does it cost for a week or 2 weeks? And then I go. So he becomes my guide and interpreter. But in some areas, we have to hire a local interpreter who knows his language and the local language.
Okay, this is a good follow-up. Jenny Quo asks, was the guide from a tribal background too? I think you had several guides, but I guess you can answer that for you.
Well, I had, okay, here's the thing. When I went to the Powell area, I had my guide, Ernest, but he had to hire a local guide. That's the tradition. Because if you go into their territory and you don't have a local person, you're not welcome. And the only thing I can show you or tell you is when some people went to Papua New Guinea, they had a guide and they were going through some areas where they didn't have a local guide and they all got killed because that's their territorial region. So they have agreements that any guide that brings anybody in there has to hire a local guide. And the powwow girl that was in the pictures was my local guide who, again, I said, took a liking to me and took me to these very special places, which the guide, the outside guide, is not allowed to go to.
Okay, AC Dre actually asked a lot of questions. So here's another
Good.
one from them. What drew you to this area? The Golden Triangle was notorious for lawlessness and drugs.
Yes, it's a very dangerous area. It's an area that everybody tells you not to go to. I am not interested in drugs. On the other hand, I'm so curious, but I do research on the local ethnic tribes. And there's 4 different tribes that I wanted to see. And the only way to do that is to go into these areas. Now, I will tell you a little anecdote for this guy who asked this question. We're on a trail and we're going up a trail. My guide's ahead of me. And all of a sudden, out of nowhere, he says, Pierre, you need to tie your shoe. I immediately bent down and tied my shoe, which was not untied because there was 2 ponies and some people walking by. And afterward, I says, what do you mean? He says, these were drug deals and they did not want you to see their faces and they didn't want to see your face. So therefore, that is all going on. But the thing that to me struck me is that you have to be on toe. I mean, I could have said, what do you mean? My shoes are they're not open. What do you mean? You don't do that. He said, bend down, tie your shoes. I did. Afterwards, he explained to me why. So sometimes these situations in these very, very volatile areas, I was in this one village and there was this man who's coming by. He has a satchel and he sat down, he was talking, I asked who he is. He was a local connection of all the tribes. He was like going from tribe to tell village to village where the military was, where the barricades was, when they're leaving, all of that. So that was like the information route for the locals. And so you listen to it. And this guy said, well, if you want to see this village, wait for 2 days because the military will be gone. Go to the left, go to the right. So you have to be very flexible and you have to trust them. because they know what they're doing. Don't underestimate it just because they don't have modern stuff. They know what they're doing, and that area is very, very volatile. Now, Burma, or those days, was the world #1 production and distribution of opium. So that waned a little bit. Now we have Afghanistan and others, but that was their major income. And obviously, when you have army, they benefited from it because they got paid off by the local tribes and so on. And as I said at the beginning, there was a huge corridor into China and Thailand, which was totally designed for the drug markets.
Another follow-up question from AC Dre. How did the narcotic trade affect the daily life of these people? Did you see evidence of addiction among villagers?
There's no addiction amongst the villagers that I could tell of, but I tell you, it affected their trade. That was their income. And when the federal government came in and started clamping down and doing all sorts of regulations and rules and coming to the village and burning their homes and such, it does affect. This was their income, yes. And some of them made agreements to cultivate other crops on the field after they convinced the government that they had burnt down the poppy fields. But it's never 100%. It's like almost like whack-a-mole. You hit one and it goes somewhere else. So it's very difficult to put a handle on exactly how much is still being done or who is benefiting from it. But and I wasn't interested in those statistics at that time. I must tell you, it would have been too complicated. I just afterwards read up on it in terms of information that came to me because they knew I went there. But and yeah, it's serious business, and you have to somehow convince the locals that you're okay, that you're not a spy, or you're not going to tell anybody what you see. When they showed me those guns, I was sworn to secrecy. I mean, they didn't say that, but I knew that's what they meant.
I'll say this one also from AC Dre, but it's kind of following the drug thing right now. So this was about the medicine I think your guide was giving out. So the question is, was the placebo medicine so that everyone felt they were treated equally?
Okay, the placebo pill, I'm assuming it was something like a sugar pill like we give when we do in the aspirin range. So they had aspirin, but it was a sugar pill coated with, it was a pill sugar coated. That was the main one. But also the same looking one was what I thought was aspirin or Bufferin or something like that. On the other hand, there were 2 or 3 people who had really prescription, or not, they don't prescribe anything, but prescription drugs, if you will, that my guide knew that in this village there was a man who needed it and he brought it in. So, but the placebo was just to make it feel like they're part of everything, and it worked. Trust me, it worked.
So Jenny Crow asked a question about the you showed the man with that was showing you his body with the tattoos. So
Tattoos, yes.
So what are the meanings behind the tattoos?
How many hours do you have? Okay, let me, I'll give some answer, but I can't be here all the time. The idea was that their traditional tribal history is recorded on the chest. The chest tells me, or tells us, who his father was, who the leader of the village was, and who his grandfather. It's the lineage, family lineage. The other traditional tattoos on the rest of the body all are connected to some spiritual connection, to some respect, to some, fair, I don't say fairy tales, that's not a fair way of saying it, but things that they believe in and that they exemplify with a tattoo. In the Chinese community, you'll see a dragon. Okay, to whom, what does that dragon mean to whom? And it's different to anybody else or whatever. And some of them are, in our society, are just punks putting it on and they have no idea what that means. So when you see a young guy here with all this Chinese writing and all these tattoos on his head, on his face, or on the back, they don't know. But the tribal people, every single tattoo is connected to a meaning. And yes, he did tell me, and I would be honest, I forgot half of them. I remember the sensational one, who killed whom and all that. But again, that's their private world. what was surprising is that he felt he should share it with me, knowing that I don't have a clue about these tattoos, but he wanted to share it with me. And the women were sitting all around looking and not applauding, but ooh, ah, ooh, yeah, oh, wow, oh, responding to his stories of these tattoos that he was sharing with me. And I tell you again, that's to answer the very first question. Someone says, "Why do you go there?" Those are the things that are exciting to me. Those are things that you don't read in a book, and that's where you can't see it. You can't see it on a screen. You can't see it anywhere except face to face with his people, and that's what I thrive on. That's why I'm crazy. That's what they say.
Okay, we have a question or a compliment and a question from Patricia Thompson. Your photography is amazingly colorful and composed perfectly. How did they become comfortable with you pointing your camera at them?
That's a very good question. That's a very sensitive question. There are areas I show you a picture, but maybe I was in that village for 2 or 3 days before I even brought out the camera. In the olden days, when I had film, I had like a little snap camera, one of these like $2 cameras, and I would just give. I'll tell you a story. I would just give it to kids. They were in the village taking pictures. Then I would come out with my camera. I did that in one village, and then when I came home and sent the film to be developed, the developing company, I won't say who they were, called me up and says, Mr. Odier, they call me Mr. Odier, you're not allowed to do pornography. I said, wait a moment. I don't do pornography. So what happened is that kid took the camera and was taking pictures of his family, his mother and father making love. That was what he did. I'm going, okay. So I have to be very careful how and when I bring out the cameras. But I don't know how to explain this. I can just tell you it happens. You have to have that respect. You have to have that aura of connectedness. And for me personally, it works. It worked, and it always has. But I can't tell anybody else how and what to do it. But the question is so valid because yes, there are times where I explain that they feel that you're invading their spirit. I convince them. And that's another thing where I bring my kids over, the pictures of my kids, as you see in this picture here, is because I tell them I share their stories with my children. And then sometimes I explain that I'm a teacher and I want them to know how they're doing it. And even when you think about it, they are connected. Look at, I don't know if you still see the picture on the screen, but look at that t-shirt. That's a Western cartoon. So they're exposed to things that we never thought they were exposed to. So I make an effort to bring in things that they would be interested in, like my family pictures. My family is gonna criticize me now because they're old and they're young, my little babies. Anyway, so yeah, you share it, and bringing out the camera is a very touchy situation. Yes, I agree.
How much time do you have for a few more questions?
Where am I gonna go?
Okay. So
does the machine work? Is it on batteries? If it works, go for it. No, I'd be glad to answer a question because that's important.
Okay, so Youngie asks, did you feel afraid at any time?
Oh my God. I felt afraid coming home because I got used to such a different pattern and such a different rhythm. When you say afraid, you are on your toes. I usually lose a lot of weight when I travel. I'm always on alert. I never just relax and chill like if you went to a spa somewhere. So afraid is not the right word, but totally always locked in. Looking behind you, in front of you, up and down, looking at the floor. What animals are there? What bush is poisonous? Do you hear a sound? Is that a good sound? So there's a whole package of sensitivity, environment, involvement with me. Sound, ears, smell. I smell stuff. Oh, there's a fire going. Is this and that? So afraid not. There are maybe times where afterwards I said, oh God, is this what really happened? But during that time, you just act and you react and you move forward, like with that donkey with the drugs going down the hill. Afterwards, I say, oh crap, if you had seen my face, what would they have done? But then it's too late. You pass it. And and I want to say this in all respect, that's the one thing that I always try to impose on my daughters. And I have their support. But I had a girlfriend at one time, and we separated because she was afraid of where I was going and what I was doing. But it was so in me that I couldn't do that. So I had to convince my daughter that I'm coming home. And sometimes that wasn't easy, because I remember when I was in crossing Siberia, I was stranded there for 2 weeks and couldn't get across the Bering Strait, and finally made it. But so yes, there is a risk, but you only live once. And that's the only way I can say it. I'm not trying to be sarcastic or snobby, but you live once, and let's live it. Let's see. And yes, you have to take some risks, and sometimes the risks are mechanical. The boat sinks, the airplane crashes, and then you just go forward. But and you treat the authorities, you treat them with the biggest respect, even though they're the biggest, you know what. And it got me out of a lot of binds that all of a sudden you start sharing stories or laughters, or you poke him in the stomach because you touched a button and he looks. And anyway, you have to learn how to function in that, and I don't recommend it to anybody. It's just what I do. Sorry. That's just who I am. I apologize for this vague answer, but that's just the way it is.
So Jenny Cole asked a question: does a government guarantee purchase of the non-narcotic crops? Else that method is useless.
At one time, the government had a piece of the action. Yes. I personally do not know to what level. If they harass the locals, or if they give one group or one family the land to grow it on and prevent the other one, that I don't know. But the areas where most of it was grown was so remote that for the military or the government or anybody to go in there to control or to check everything, it was too cumbersome. So they just did it. But they did move around in different areas. But like I said, even with when I showed you the alcohol, where they were making the alcohol, that's why they were paying the government off with the alcohol. So I'm not saying that the government's officials took the drugs, but there was a connection. They got paid. It was a symbiotic kind of connection, which goes on all over the world now. I mean, nobody is immune to that.
Let's see. I think this is in response to your Mickey Mouse. Tanya Norse said, I spent a month in Burma in 1987. I traveled in a decrepit bus into the mountains and all over, and did meet some of the people that you mentioned. Years ago, the International Red Cross painted Mickey Mouse in their equipment, and the locals seemed to know Mickey Mouse, so weren't scared of the equipment. I actually worked with Walt Disney in the 1960s and actually discussed that with Walt. Thank you. I really enjoyed it.
Well, I can't talk to him about that, because if he's connected to Walt Disney, they'll come and harass me. I have made many bets that no matter where I go in the world, no matter what village, what city, what country, I will come back with Mickey Mouse pictures. I have about 400 Mickey Mouse pictures. And the beauty of that is that some of them, like the one that you're looking at there, it's so primitively painted, and the intent is there. Now, the real question to answer his question is, my question was always, why Mickey Mouse? There are thousands of cartoons that made the world from all different cultures. What was the survival of Mickey Mouse? And someone says, well, it's the American economy. No, it had nothing to do with that. There's something with the character, the colors, the shapes, which is a psychological soothing element for children being used for that. In China and all other countries, I have Mickey Mouse painted on trash cans to encourage the kids to put the trash in there. In other countries, I have it in hospital rooms. In others, I have merchants who just painted on the side of the house because they just wanted Mickey Mouse there. So yeah, that to me, it's a whole other story. And one day I will probably try to figure out why that particular cartoon has such a global appearance, or a global tenacity. I guess it's forever. And yes, and I end all my shows, you can ask Bobby, every show I end is with the picture of a Mickey Mouse from that place. And the only one on this one that was really Mickey Mouse was on that wall, the little Mickey Mouse on the horse. So, and I didn't, at that time, didn't think to do a close-up, but you saw it, it's there.
Let's see. Okay, we have, I think, 3 more questions, unless more people add to this. But
okay.
But I'm willing to go as long as you are willing to. But
well, I have no limit. So you know, you're paying me so handsomely. I'm just, my ticker is going. No,
Okay.
I'm just kidding. I'll be glad to answer that.
Okay, Patricia Thompson asks regarding secrecy, are you concerned that by sharing with us the country leaders to learn what would compromise these people and where they are?
You know, these are very good questions, and that's why I want to continue answering them, because they're very valid. There is a very, okay, I have to segue to China. When I first went to China in the 80s and taking pictures, yes, the government went up to the villages and punished the villagers for letting me in the village. Yes, that does happen. Retribution to the locals. Retribution to me has not happened, because whenever I was confronted, I could convince them that my intention had nothing to do with interfering in internal affairs. That's kind of using a Chinese term, because that's where I had the most confrontation about being there without permission. A lot of these places I'm in without permission, and in some areas nobody can find me there because they don't travel in that area. But the showing the programs here at home, and I think you, Bob, you can attest to that. I always start the program by making sure that the people looking and listening to my program are, it's done in respect. That's why some of the images which have been sensational, like the naked ladies at the water fountain and all that, they're not going to get this here, because I'm not here to entertain the off the wall interests or prejudice. I'm here to share not only the people, but now lately with the A Pebble in the Sand, my stories. When I published the first books on these minority tribes, everybody afterwards said, we don't know anything about you. And I said, it's not about me, it's about these people. So finally, a couple of years ago, a year ago, I was convinced by some people that I should start writing my story, my experiences. So the book on Burma is my experience there based on them. But if there is a picture that would be compromising their dignity or their solidarity or whatever it is, I would not put it in. And when you talk about children, I will always have permission from the elders before I take a child picture, period. And that's kept me going so far. Internally, they have to be convinced that you're not a threat to them and that your intentions are positive. And I don't know what the formula is. I seem to be making friends everywhere and I get along with people. And that's something I take advantage of when I'm in this area. But you also have to know when not to do it. You know, in some areas, you don't shake hands, or you don't touch a kid on the head, or you don't, in other areas, the old lady comes and hugs you, and that's okay, you know. And so you have to kind of know. But I can't really tell you the definitive answer to your question of who's being prosecuted. I just tell you that's the way I am, and it has to be done on respect and history. You have to know where you are and what you're doing. Yes, true.
Okay, Albert Chang asked a question. Well, first Albert says, thank you, Pierre, for a fascinating talk.
Thank you.
Do you,
Thank you.
do you see any evidence of government activity, e.g. schools, social agencies, etc.?
In those remote areas, no. They're trying to, but they are so self-sufficient. And the schools that were open in the remote areas, we're talking about Burma now, not globally, most of them were started by religious organizations. Catholics or Protestants or went in there. They're the ones who started a lot of these schools and furnished teachers. The problem with, in my opinion, this is my opinion, I would not want to be in an area where I have to present my religion to get their trust. And unfortunately, that's happening a lot, especially in Papua New Guinea. There was the Lutherans were in there, but they left some things behind too. They put churches in there, and then they put hospitals and teach them and all that. But when it comes to the government, that's a slippery slope. Be honest with you. All of a sudden, you realize that everybody has a viewpoint, and everybody thinks their point is better than the other point. And I really, really put a lot of effort in avoiding all of that. And even when I will tell you an example of that. I was documenting the Gur minority in China, and I was in there 2 years in succession, illegally documenting everything. Well, anyway, I made good friends. I convinced them that they could not become the 57th party. Anyway, so long history. I documented everything. And once they had the 50-year reunion of all the local tribe people there, they made every effort to contact me here in Eagle Rock through connections and this and that to go there to that festival. And I didn't want to go there because I was arrested once there by the government saying you were interfering with internal affairs and you shouldn't be here. But then the next year I came, I made friends with that guy who arrested me and he came to the village with me. But anyway, so then I'm sitting there and I tell you, 50-year festival, every single Gurja person with all their costume were there, about 2,000 people in costume. I was the only outsider there and a few secret policemen. And I'm trying to hide, low profile. And all of a sudden my guide comes to me, my friend with a guide says, you have to go up to the podium there, or it's a hill on a hillside. And I went up there and I thought, oh, I'm on it, I can sit there. Next thing I know, no, they want you to give a speech. My God. So I get up and I give a 1-minute speech and thanking them for being, but I couldn't say that I had been here before because the secret police that was in the crowd would have known. And so I did a 1-minute thing and I said, no, you got to give a speech. Well, what am I going to talk about? So it was the year of the horse. So I started with what you in America or anywhere would say, Pierre, you're so full of bullshit. I don't believe you. I was talking about horses and the spirit and how the future and traditions carried on the back of a horse, on and on. I spoke for 29 minutes. But you have 2,000 people standing below you on the hill, silent, not understanding a single word you're saying, silently watching you. That left such an impression on me that I never got over it. Then a couple of days later, the head of the Chinese Communist Party found out about that village, came up, and they were telling him all about that. He comes up to me, and he was paralyzed, half paralyzed. And he hugs me in a bear hug. He almost killed me. And his tears were coming down and I never could figure out what was going through his head. But I found out later that he originally was from that tribe, but he had left and joined the Communist Party and went somewhere else. So all of a sudden these things happen to you and you just have to be, I don't know, on top of it and hope that you're doing the right thing. Now, if they had arrested me down the hill, I couldn't have done anything about it. I was there alone with my friend and that's it. So you have to be ready for that. And I know that's not a good sign to tell my daughters that, but that's the truth. Is my daughter listening to this? I think she made contact with you, didn't she?
She did, but I'm not, I don't know. There's actually,
I dare her not to ask any questions. Anyway, so they're spying on me too now. So that's okay. That's okay.
Or they'll see the report later.
Yeah.
Here's another question.
They'll get on my.
Patricia Thompson, the dyes and somewhat tailored clothes, would you say something about how they were able to do this with so little access to the necessary tools?
Well, what do you mean necessary tools? All you need is a few sticks and some twine that you made out of local fiber. The dyes are natural dyes from plants. The main one that was exported at that time, which they put into the silk and not in the silk and the cotton thing, was the indigo dye, which goes with your blue jeans, or indigo dye. So this was a dye that came from 12th century. Actually, that's not true. 11th century China is the first evidence that I have of indigo dye being used in fabric. And it was used in batik, meaning where it's a wax process. But anyway, the fabric itself that you saw, the wool hanging there, they dye it with their local dyes. Now, having said that, in China, the Gurs were dyeing their indigo dyes with their own indigo paste. However, the Miao on the outside and the Hans came in with Chinese indigo powder and started setting up an operation and charging those girls from the village to come down and dye their fabric in their dye pits. So it took a different turn, if you will, and the product then is being marketed. But all this fabric and the weaving technique, the knotting, the stretching of it, that's all handed down locally from in different areas from different families. And some families have the reputation of putting out the best fabric, and the other one has the reputation of putting out the best something else, and then they trade. So that's the trade route that has kept a lot of this stuff going. And if you talk, why do we call the Silk Road the Silk Road? It was a fabrics material exchange from the West and the East, where the West wanted it. And all of a sudden, that goes way back in history. And that to me is fascinating.
Okay, I think we have, well, you actually got a lot of compliments in the chat. I didn't read all of them, but a lot of people.
Oh, come on, stroke my ego a little bit.
Well, okay, here, I'll read.
No, I'm just kidding. Just give me
I'll
the
read the
real
last
questions.
Yeah, thank you so much. That was fascinating and brought back many wonderful memories of my time in Burma. A lot of them were along those lines.
Good.
So I think it might be good to end here with Patricia's last question. And someone actually asked a similar question too. Where's your next trip or next adventure?
Let's get rid of coronavirus first. Number one, I was sidelined for an entire year. It's hard to tell. I don't want to say anything because some people are listening and say, hey, when are you going there? What you're doing? But I don't know. I'll be very honest, because right now I have some areas that are exciting to me, and unfortunately there's war going on, and also, so I don't want to say anything, because I might disappear and come back and tell you the story. You say, well, how did you do that? Well, I didn't tell you I was going, so you couldn't stop me. So, but that's a good question. It's in my blood, and I will be doing this forever.
All right, Bobby, you have your last.
Oh, okay, well, I guess you've been thanked in the chat, but I want to personally thank you, and I want to thank you for all of the attendees, both from the China Society, the Chinese Historical Society, and whoever else saw our announcements. I want to remind the audience that this talk was based on his book on Burma and Myanmar, and that we will be sending you a link to the L'Image Odier, his publishing company. I think another thing that's very interesting, if you go to that site, you'll see the other books in his series, A Pebble in the Sand. They include Egypt, Devil's Island, and Siberia. As you already know, Pierre has offered to give us more talks. I am interested in Devil's Island. All I need is a Chinese connection. Perhaps someone of Chinese ancestry went to France, committed some hideous crime, and was sentenced to the infamous prison on Devil's Island.
Oh, there's Chinese commerce on Devil's Island, not on Devil's Island, but in French Guiana.
Well,
So
anyway,
I could tell you a lot about that.
Anyway, if people in the audience can let me know if they want Pierre back on some not so Chinese related subject, please let me know. Anyway, I want to thank him again. I also want to thank our web hostess, Felicia, who's done a wonderful job of making everything go pretty smoothly. And also the Chinese Historical Society, who is, again, has been our co-sponsor. With this, I think I want to thank all of you for attending, and hopefully you'll be here next month if we have a nice program. I think we can end the program now unless anybody else has something to say. Once again, thank you, Pierre.
You're very welcome. Very welcome.